Hello, everyone. I'm Jen Flynn, Senior Director of Global Outreach at the Kenneth C. Griffin Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. We have folks joining us from all across the United States and from 28 other countries around the world. And on behalf of Harvard Griffin GSAS, I want to thank you for taking time out of your day today to join us as we learn from our distinguished colleagues from the Harvard Data Science Review about the many dimensions of future shock and how as individuals and societies we're grappling with the generative AI revolution. The bios of our esteemed panelists were in the invitation you received, so I want to just very briefly introduce them before we delve into the topic of our event today. Our interlocutor for the day is Xiao-Li Meng, PhD 90 in statistics. He is the founding editor of the Harvard Data Science Review and the Whipple V.N. Jones Professor of Statistics at Harvard, and he is the former dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. Meng was named the best statistician under the age of 40 by the Committee of Presidents of Statistical Societies in 2001, and he's the recipient of numerous awards and honors for his more than 150 publications in at least a dozen theoretical and methodological areas, as well as in the areas of pedagogy and professional development. Francine Berman is the Director of Public Interest Technology and Stuart Rice Research Professor in the Manning College of Information and Computer Science at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She is a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University and was selected as the 2019-2020 Katherine Hampson Bessel Fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. Ralph Heerbrich is the professor of computer science at Hasso-Plattner Institute and the University of Potsdam and chair of the research group on artificial intelligence and sustainability. Previously, he served as senior vice president of artificial intelligence at Zalando and director of machine learning at Amazon in Berlin, after starting and leading Facebook's unified ranking and allocation team from 2011 to 2012. And last but certainly not least, David Leslie is the Director of Ethics and Responsible Innovation Research at the Alan Turing Institute and Professor of Ethics, Technology, and Society at Queen Mary University in London. He previously taught at Princeton's University Center for Human Values, Yale's program in Ethics, Politics, and Economics, and at Harvard's Committee on Degrees in Social Studies, where he received over a dozen teaching awards. Before we turn to our stimulating conversation, just a word of housekeeping. Please put all questions for our panelists in the Q&A function, not the chat. The chat is for us to send those to our interlocutor. So please put all of your questions in the chat. And now I am delighted to turn things over to Xiao-Li Meng. Xiao-Li, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining this event. And I know that we probably are all on different time zones. I'm actually hosting from Australia early in the morning. And I'm particularly happy to host the event for alumni. And as Jen mentioned, that I was the former dean of Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. During my deanship, one of the highlights of being a dean is the opportunity to meet all alumni all over the world. And I hope that I have actually met some of you. Welcome again. After I stepping down as the dean, I have been given this opportunity to start the Harvard Data Science Review. And here is just a very quick introduction because it's a great intellectual resources for all of you. It's free of charge. You can check anytime. And we publish articles from perspectives to applications. We have all the different columns. And Jen, you can slide to the next one if there's a second slides. And the most relevant for this events, we have special issues calling for on any articles for generative AI. And these three colleagues of mine here, they are the three co-editors for this special issue. And I'm extremely pleased today that we will hear directly from them what they think. Starting from the question, I'm going to ask all of them right away. We all talk about generative AI, but what does that really mean? And I like to start the question with Fran.
And it helps if I don't mute myself. It's great to see everybody there and everybody in the audience. Generative AI is artificial intelligence capable of generating things. So it's other media and patterns and all of that. The way it works is interesting, is because it's trying to pick up patterns and characterize what it is about them that makes the image the image. And so generative AI has all kinds of interesting technical ways of doing that and to get the accuracy you want of what that image might be.
Ralph, the same question?
Yeah, kind of similarly, I think generative AI in itself is not that new as a mathematical model. I think what's really novel about it right now is the amount of data that is used to extract these patterns. So previously we had relatively small corpora of maybe some handwritten notes, but because we have models that start to match in terms of the number of parameters, the capacity that we have in the human brain, and because we have the amount of textual and picture information that exceeds anyone's single lifetime, the patterns it does learn are extremely powerful and expressive. And so for me, generative AI is sort of sequence models of data on steroids because of the amount of data that we produce that comes from our society.
Thank you very much. And David.
I mean, I would add to this maybe a governance perspective or even a social science perspective and say, when we think of generative AI, we need to think of its conditions of possibility. So we need to think modally. So what's needed for a generative AI system to sort of run and operate in the world. And if we think this way, we start to think about various levels of infrastructure. So generative AI is not just its function, not just the kind of character of the technology itself, it's compute infrastructure, right? Everything from the fiber optic cables that transfer information to the underlying GPUs and all the infrastructure that's allowing for information processing. It's data infrastructure, it's the proprietary data sets, it's the data centers, it's the modes of curating across the data pipeline. It's skills and expertise infrastructure. So here we're thinking about those, very small number of our population who are actually equipped to handle the kind of software development and to handle this statistical and the mathematical details. The other bit of definition that I would add here is if we set generative AI next to the conventional machine learning systems, where we understand the life cycle of these systems as, roughly involving project design, model development, and system deployment. What we would understand as what's being different in generative AI is that these systems are multi-phase. And so it's not just that you have one simple socio-technical life cycle of design, development, and deployment. You have, first off, the data feeds into the training of a sort of base model, a foundation model, which is the kind of large, basis of what a generative AI system is. But then that system can have multiple downstream applications. And so what you have is you have the design, development, and deployment of the base model, but then you have what we call amplification, or you have got the fine-tuning of that base model in accordance with whatever desired functions the application builder might have, right? So one thing in terms of governance we need to think about here is that this is a distributed sort of, supply chain, and we need to think about all of these complex moments along this multi-phase supply chain.
Thank you, David. And then let's get to the second question. And again, it's to all of you. What do you feel like are the three biggest risks and the three biggest opportunities with generative AI? And then let's start with Fran again.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. We could probably spend the whole webinar on this. I think one of the biggest risks is tech dominance and misbehavior overriding the public interest. So if you think about everything you read, it's the drama you're seeing out of Silicon Valley, it's what companies are doing, it's the impact of innovation and turning that into tools and services. But AI is much more than that. And the management of AI that will help humanity and society thrive is much more than that. And I think we don't put enough time and effort and scrutiny onto what we need to do that. In order to take these wonderful innovations, think about, it's not an exactly right analogy, but think about atomic power. It can power nuclear power can power cities, and it can destroy humanity. And what have we done about that? We've put all kinds of guardrails on that. We have standards, we have laws, we have regulation. We're trying to integrate it into society in as high benefit and as low risk as possible. We haven't done that with AI. And so that I think is something that encompasses, probably all of the risks, poor oversight and management, no humans in the loop. I think those are really problems with AI. Did you ask for the opportunities, Xiao-Li, or are we sticking with the risks?
So challenges, opportunity always, come together.
Right. Say that again.
I say challenges, opportunities always come together. Yes. So please talk about
So
opportunities as well.
Opportunities, I think, are super interesting. If you think about AI, we are already seeing, in the right kinds of circumstances, opportunities for more efficiency, for more customization when it matters, more tools for assisting us. Think about the way people are now reading images for health, and the kinds of things AI can do to kind of go through a whole set of cases that are helping doctors sort of figure out what's going on. I think it's giving us, in a challenging way, but I think it's still an opportunity to restructure work, time, and responsibilities for the betterment of humanity. And I think getting there is hard. But I think if we can utilize AI as a tool and as an assist, and to do a lot of the things that perhaps we have people doing now, what does that mean for the workforce? And can we do that can we restructure things in a way that's actually better? The last thing I want to say that really intrigues me is I was listening to Stuart Russell's Commonwealth speech the other day, and he said that he thought that humans have a competitive advantage in a lot of things that AI will never do. AI will never have empathy. AI will never have emotions. AI will never have interpersonal relationships. And if you think about kind of restructuring things down the line in a way that really leverages our capacity for those kinds of things, our capacity for ethical behavior, and kind of create a hybrid world in which AI does some things and we do others, it gives us a chance to be the best of ourselves. So I find all those things opportunities and intriguing, and of course the devil's in the details.
Thank you very much, friend. And the same question to Rolf.
Yeah, so I want to sort of talk first about two of the risks I see that Fran hasn't mentioned. So one of them is we see the systems producing very human-like and believable predictions in the form of text or images. But what I think we humans are also very good at is to express uncertainty. It's one measure of someone's seniority is how much they know what they don't know. And these systems right now are not built algorithmically to reliably quantify when they're uncertain. And what that leads to is a too high degree of belief in the truth of the statements or of the visual facts that get created. And that's a big risk. And as an opportunity, it's also a great research area. I think we've, as a research community, have demonstrated that we can learn the patterns from these humongous amounts of text and image data, but we haven't yet leveraged all the methods that also allow to quantify this uncertainty. The other aspect I see is that these systems right now, and again, this is a snapshot of research as we stand, consume a lot of energy as they do these calculations. In the days where I worked in the companies that was mentioned, one of the key considerations was always, what does it cost to compute an intelligent prediction, whether it's a web search result or an advertisement? Right now, the cost stands often in no relationship, and the cost is, you can measure it in dollars, or you can measure it literally what it is in terms of energy. So something that I think is also a bit of a risk is to use these models at their current way of implementing and running without doing the energy balance. Now, the opportunities that I see is that when I started in 95 to look for the first time into AI methods, and then in the 2000s in their applications in industrial context, and an enormous amount of effort was going into what we call feature engineering, like that you have a data set and it's textual or it's images, and you, as the engineer of the AI system, engineer first how you represent the data to the algorithms that make predictions. I think the great opportunity we have is with the patterns that are abundant, in the way that text is structured or image is structured, we have a very good representation of visual and textual data that we can build upon for domain-specific applications that have taken decades, if not longer, of human intelligence to produce, of software engineers and modelers and statisticians. So I think that's a great opportunity to leverage those representations for further applications in a much more domain-specific way.
Thank you, Ralph. And the same question to David.
I mean, I want to go back first to something that Fran said, which is that, we have this kind of unique leverage of having empathy and capacity for solidarity and interpersonal relationships. And I sort of identify the first risk just in the sense that these systems, as they're being kind of trained through things like reinforcement learning through human feedback, are really being trained to be anthropomorphically almost deceptive when it comes to the relationship that one has with the system itself, right? So when you have anthropomorphic deception, it can lead to behavioral manipulation. It can lead to harms of human dignity and a person's sense of moral or psychological integrity. So you have, for instance, conversation agents like ChatGPT that are being trained to carry out human-like dialogue, and this can actually deceptively lead people to believe they're interacting with kind of real warm-blooded agents, and that can really undermine, in a sense, the kind of interpersonal relationship that we sort of come to assume is part of our interaction. Many years ago, there was a researcher named Joseph Weizenbaum who called the ELIZA effect, which is this tendency for human beings when interacting with the simplest of chatbots to just project kind of human-like qualities into the system. And that, in a sense, it really does make us vulnerable to losing a bit of that kind of authentic interpersonal relationship. Another thing I just mentioned in terms of a larger scale set of risks, the risk to the integrity of information ecosystems. So we know that the irresponsible or malicious development of Gen AI technologies could lead to the scaled production of disinformation, propaganda, false but true-sounding information, which could potentially flood the digital public square with misleading and non-factual content. I mean, this is so important right now to think about this amidst all of these major elections coming up now, and about 1 billion people, the biggest election, I think, in human history, about 1 billion people will show up at the polls quite soon. And we can think of the kind of potential scaled use of these systems as posing a threat to those kind of broader democratic processes. Also, if you think about the integrity of information ecosystems, we can think about how it's not just the undermining practices, but it's also the downstream effects on our data ecosystem, right? So, we see now that the volume of synthetic generated content out there in our information ecosystem is likely going to create the kinds of data pollution that will contaminate downstream data sets and really challenge future attempts to draw on this kind of public space of data in order to train systems. I mean, there's been things written about model collapse, how eventually a polluted sort of downstream data set will sort of narrow into the mean, and all of the kind of unique outlying ideas that are out there won't be picked up by the models. There'll be a collapse of the models. So we really need to think about that. One final thing, Xiao-Li, in terms What we've seen, I think, over the last year is a kind of commercialization or industrialization of these generative AI systems, but in a way which I think just looking at what's happened recently with OpenAI and Sam Altman and Microsoft, which has really led to a kind of unchecked consolidation or centralization of power amidst a few large tech companies who control the data infrastructures, the compute infrastructures, the kind of skills engineering and software engineering infrastructures. And this, if we sort of step back from a social scientific point of view, this can really undermine ultimately the public interest. This could lead to increasing wealth polarization, increasing global inequality, uncontrolled labor disruption, elimination of vulnerable industries. And so we really need to be careful that as we now think about how to regulate these systems, we really think about that broader ecosystem dynamic of power differential and how there is a difference between small and medium-sized companies trying to use these systems to advance whatever purpose, and the way that these bigger players are actually controlling and intermediating the broader environment. Now, that might seem, I do have one nice set of opportunities that I would highlight. And this really has to do with scientific discovery, because I do think for me, the sort of the most liberating possibility with generative AI and transformer models and these large scale models is that they can assist us to be more creative. So in a sense, if we can think of these systems as computational vehicles of observation and assay and even analysis, these systems can allow science heuristically probe unbounded search spaces and patterns in high-dimensional data that would otherwise be inaccessible to human-scale examination and thinking, right? So, you know, we think at any given time with a handful, but what these systems are doing is they're picking up patterns in very high dimensional data that are simply that would simply exceed our own capacity to identify those patterns. And so one thing that these systems are going to do is they're going to allow for us to have new kind of lenses into different worlds in the natural world. So thinking about, for instance, how already these systems have been used to physical symmetries in high energy physics. They've been used to discover new chemical compounds. They've been used to discover new engineered materials in virtue of this capacity to sort of heuristically search and identify large dimensional patterns.
Thank you very much, David. Before I go on, I want to thank all the audience who already provide new questions. And we have a list of questions collected previously, and so I will be picking up some questions which is already covered on our list of questions. So let me go on, and I will intertwine some other questions. And so my next question is to David again. To what extent are these advancements presenting contemporary society with a danger of the future shock?
Right, Xiao-Li. So this is our title of the collected volume. And I think when we were all, initially talking about this, one of the first things that came to mind about this kind of, I don't know, industrial revolution of AI, if we could call it that, right? This moment, this Gen AI moment, is something that psychologist Alvin Toffler described as future shock, which is, I mean, as he would say, kind of dizzying disorientation brought on by the premature arrival of which is to say that when technological change, if you will, outpaces the kind of norms, understandings, social practice and ways of governing our behavior that exist at any given time, we are subject, as Toffler would say, to too much change in too short a time. And really what future shock is it presents us with this issue of, are we ready for this? Do we have the institutional structures? Do we have the governance structures in place to responsibly manage this type of change? And I mean, we're kind of seeing that we are feeling this kind of what Toffler would call shattering stress, right, on our bigger systems, kind of rushing to how we can, for instance, regulate AI in time to head off at the pass, if you will. For instance, really significant labor disruption, or significant, as I mentioned, disruption of information ecosystems. And so, I mean, I think when we talk about future shock, that we don't treat the AI in scare quotes as being out of our hands, right? That it's just the horse is out of the barn and it's going to do what it does. I don't think we should see it that way, because we, at the end of the day, we have our hands on the wheel always of the technology, because it's humans who make the technology, right? So we have to be aware that we can affect future shock by hastily producing technology, but that doesn't mean that the technology itself is out of our hands. And so I think we need to just be careful not to be what we would call technologically deterministic and say, well, there's nothing we can do about this future. We need to do the best we can. And I would say, I think that's maybe one of the reasons why we've been motivated to produce this edited volume amidst all of the busyness that this time presents to everyone. So.
Well, thank you, David, and I certainly thank again all of you for taking on this tremendous task. Let me ask a friend as a specific example of we experiencing the future shock, and how does the generative AI, shock, so to speak, the academic world, but regarding the accepted norms and the practice of scientific research, teaching, scholarship, and academic publication, all the things that we do in the academic world.
Yeah, we're
This is
really in
for
the
Frank.
thick of it, aren't we? I did want to reinforce one of David's points, which is that by definition, disruptive technologies disrupt, and they really cause us to do things differently. And that transition period is always challenging. And it's not just AI. I mean, think to nuclear energy and how we had to integrate things. Think to the Industrial Revolution, when iron and chemical manufacturing changed everything. It changed where people lived. It changed the kind of laws they had. You had some of your first child labor laws and environmental protection laws because of the rise of factories. And so we are going to need to do the same things now. If you look today at our institutions, in particular our academic institutions, AI is truly a disruptive technology, and in particular ChatGPT. It's changing the way we teach and learn. It's changing how we do research. And something you might not be thinking about is it changes how we run our universities, because our universities are businesses and they're organizations. And there's lots of things our universities do at scale. They admit students, they do performance evaluation, they hire, et cetera. And that's changing the way a lot of people are doing these things. And so, like other organizations, universities are trying to grapple with this. I'm on an AI all-university task force for University of Massachusetts, Amherst, with a lot of other people about how are we going to be dealing with it? How do we get ahead of the curve? And, there's ways that you're not going to deal with it. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. You just can't pretend we don't have these things and say we're not going to use AI, because essentially all of our students will be using AI in their professional lives. All of our faculty are using AI in various ways, our administration. So we can't put the genie back in the bottle. We have to do our jobs with the best tools available on checks and balances. So we use them ethically, equitably, et cetera. And, we're not going to wait until we know everything about AI until it happens, because, we will never be in that space. And so what universities are trying to grapple with is, how do you introduce AI in the classroom? How do you introduce AI in research? And how do you introduce AI in administration? And in the classroom, you read all the time about, like ChatGPT got into Wharton by taking all of these kinds of crazy things. But I will tell you, I use ChatGPT in my Introduction to Public Interest Technology class. And I tell the students three things. I tell them, number one, ChatGPT, you need to know how to be a good writer, and you need to know how to generate ideas yourself. You will not always have these AI tools. These AI tools can help you tremendously, but you need to know how to do this yourself. A well-written email is magic, and you need to know how to do that. You won't always have ChatGPT. Number two, ChatGPT is okay at helping you with this, but it's often wrong, and it's not an interesting writer, at least not yet. And so that you really need to use it as a co-pilot rather than with you as the pilot, as a developmental editor, maybe as an idea generator to go along with yours, but you have to be in control. And the other thing I've told my students, which is absolutely true, is nothing you put in these tools is private. So if you want to talk about sensitive material, if you want to talk about things that will go in the giant database, you have to be careful. And as an instructor, what that means is I have torqued my assignments a bit. I ask much more about students' personal experiences. I ask them to what their opinions on various things are, and to do that with this context. And I think a lot of people are doing similar sorts of things. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that, universities have to admit students at scale. They have to hire at scale. And all organizations are going to have to worry about that in the future. So in a sense, universities are kind of the point of the spear in this, but I think all of us will have to worry about it.
I certainly do as a faculty, and thank you, friend. The next question is for Rolf, and how does this moment of transformational technology change compared to other major transformations in human history? And actually, one audience asked, for example, compared to the emergence of the World Wide Web three decades back.
Wow, it's an interesting question. Because it forces me to predict the future impact of it that we've already seen of the World Wide Web. I think one of the aspects of generative AI, in particular large language models, that makes it so appealing is that the interface is much more natural. You can query in terms of questions. Your response is not a set of labels or it's text, and it's text written in your language that you understand, which is what David referred to, that it can almost give it the feeling you're talking to a human. The anthropology of it's not a system, it has life. Now, why do I say this is important? Because I think it makes the technology much more available in many more jobs in society. So where I think, so will it have the same transformational effect? The World Wide Web was impactful because it allowed to connect, beyond simply, it gapped physical distances. So I was able to get information that is not just, a few hops in my network away. I got the information through a wire, even though it was in a different part of the planet and a different time. Now I get to information that is contained in parts of the internet that is hard to find, and I get it in a form that I understand it without being a programmer. If I simply can read or write, which many people can do, I get access to that information that is buried somewhere deep, buried somewhere deep in the whole body of knowledge that's called the internet, with all its risks and all its dangers when this is wrong information or when this is biased information, but I can get to it. So will it have the same technological impact in society? I think it does, because being able to bridge physical distances with the World Wide Web, so I can do trades, I can sell something through the internet. It still has to travel physically, but I can get into a virtual shop front. I can get to a virtual bookstore. I can get into a virtual cinema. Was transformational for all aspects of commerce and entertainment, and even transportation. Because I didn't have to go there. I could simply see how it looks in Sydney right now, even though I'm not there. Now I can, I think with the large language models, I enabled the same ease of finding something that's not physically far away from me, but that's hidden through the notions of time or hidden through the depth of where it's created in parts of the internet. And therefore, I do think it will be quite transformational. Maybe I'll give you an example that continues a bit what Fran just said. I use Copilot for the last 6 months extensively in my class. So how has it changed? Well, I can now get to much harder problems, much more difficult software problems, because first of all, I use it. So it helps me a great deal in the preparation of code that I need for the assignments. I teach computer science classes, but I can also make the assignments a lot more complex. And is this like cheating? I think to a degree it's not, because when I started, there wasn't any fancy IDE. We had to type into a system called VI or Emacs. And it was very, your development speed of code writing was way slower because you made a lot of mistakes. You didn't have a proper debugger. Fast forward to 20 years, these tools are available now and they're accepted and they're not treated, they're not considered cheating when you program and have, your refactoring code macros in your IDE. You have your syntax highlighting and you have your automatic formatting and completion of method calls. This is just a continuation of this tool chain. And what it allowed me in the past 20 years and students is to tackle harder problems in a short amount of time. And I can do that now. And so I do use it. So has it changed the teaching of computer science? It has. Is it that we don't need computer science in the future? Absolutely not. They'll just be able to tackle harder problems in a short amount of time.
Thank you, Ralph. Let me move from the technology, the use of AI to another really important issue, which is the AI governance and the laws. And this question will be for David. And what's your view on in terms of the law, into the change, into the AI governance, and particularly how do you envision the law and AI governance evolving in US, EUs, and the internationally, because that's the whole generative AI is certainly a global phenomenon.
Yeah, so I think that we've seen over the last few months a kind of really huge increase in the activity around sort of international action or international cooperation and collaboration on thinking about AI governance. So we had the UK AI Safety Summit, which produced this Bletchley Declaration. We had the Partnership on AI brought together a kind of multi-stakeholder group to produce guidance on foundation models. We had the G7 has which has a Japanese presidency, has something called the Hiroshima process, which produced a whole code of conduct, international code of conduct for producing the systems. And so we see this kind of slew of multi-stakeholder initiatives. At this mostly voluntary at the international level, and that's an important thing to flag up, because we simply don't have a set of international structures that can sufficiently put controls on the technology. The other issue that we're seeing right now with this international environment is the people that are at the table and who are talking about this and who are writing these guidances largely, in a sense, overrepresent the positions, interests, and policies really of a select few geopolitical and private sector stakeholders, right? So in a sense, right now, the international policy and governance conversation to center the views of, the global north and, the kind of prominent tech actors that exist in kind of high income countries. And so we really do have a risk now of the voices and views of those who are from the non-West and what's historically been called the global South, that their voices, their views are being neglected. And we really need to be concerned about this. We need to have a more even pitching of the global conversation on this. One other thing that I'd point out here is I think there's been a tendency, especially in the UK, where I do a lot of my work, to set a kind of pro-innovation, minimal regulation mentality against of advancing these systems. So the thought is the more regulation you have, the less innovation you'll have. And I think that's kind of that often is a false dichotomy, because good, solid regulation where you've got standards that are being the kind of regulatory action and the governance constraints. You've got this creation of certainty in markets, and you've got this expansion of public trust. And so oftentimes having good, solid regulation that enables the generation of solid science does enable innovation rather than preventing the advancement of innovation. And see more recently now, if anybody's looked at the bio order, I think there is some sort of positive and constructive action on this front. We're really, thickening the approach across the different sectors, across the different government departments, to increase readiness, to address competition issues, right, in the broader ecosystem. And so I do think that progress is made. And the last thing I'd mention, in parallel, we've got the EU AI Act, which just this past couple of weeks has been pretty much brought to a political agreement, at least. It won't come into effect for a year or more, but we have a kind of a solid basis now of a kind of risk-based but rights-aware regulatory framework. And I think this is where we need to go. We need to be risk-based in the sense that the risks, the scale and the scope of the systems establishes the proportionality of the governance intervention at the same time as its values and rights-based thinking that defines those risks and defines the way in which we consider the impacts on society. So we need to walk and chew gum. We need to both understand the risks and respond proportionately to the risks, but we also need to think first and foremost about fundamental rights and freedoms, human rights, and the broader set of values that will drive the innovations forward to more sustainable society.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on that just a little bit, because I think a lot of what David says is really important for people to know, and I think they don't think about that a lot. AI all over the world is really different. And what you're seeing from the EU, what you're seeing from the US, what you're seeing from China are all really different. And they have a lot to do with power and politics, and what the cultural notion of equity is, and who's on first. Is business more important? Are individuals more important? What are the penalties? What are the rewards? And you see a variety of different ways of thinking about law, thinking about policy, thinking about the private sector all over the world. I think that's I think it's also important to note, and this gets back to something Ralph said earlier, is that power matters. And now I'm talking about, electrical power. For us to be able to run these large language models, we need huge amounts of data, and we need huge computers that eat up a lot of power. And so if you think about these disruptive technologies, and you can even include Bitcoin in that, the computational impacts of these are tremendous. And it means that big companies can get ahead. It's harder for small companies, and it makes a difference. I want to say one last thing, because I think we all hear the kind of innovation versus regulation, controversy a lot. But the fact is, nothing is done in a clean slate. I mean, we have laws of gravity. If we don't pay attention to those, that's not good. And so there are always restraints on the environment. And we innovate sometimes because of that, and sometimes in spite of that. And I think that will be true for AI as well. As there is more and more regulation, as there are more and more constraints based on cultural and political and other kinds of things, we will still innovate. We'll just innovate in a slightly different ecosystem.
Thank you, friend. That's a perfect segue to the next question. I know it's on many people's mind, and I certainly see some questions in the question and answers. How should we adjust our society and education institution to ensure AR empowers, should ensure empowers the human equality, and particularly talk about, for example, the companies now really have much more resources to do the computing than, for example, academic institution. But a lot of these inequality issues about both the individuals and different sectors, and how would you assess the likely impact of generative AI on promoting greater equality or protecting privilege? So it's a general this question to any of you, if anyone to pick up that question.
I mean, I think we need to step back for a second and understand the amount of potential good that these technologies could do if guided by the public interest, right? Which is to say, we see that these systems could help address public health challenges, address clinical challenges in clinical medicine, challenges confronting a biodiversity drain, environmental sustainability. And so in this way, and also to sort of address issues of poverty, to address educational inequities. I mean, there just is an endless list of possible public benefits that could come from the responsible and society-led use of the technology. And I'm talking about this when we talk about equality, because if we take that sort of public interest starting point, we would then recognize that these technologies are functioning or could function as public utilities. And if we understood these as public interest technologies, I think Fran will like this answer. If we understand these as public interest technologies, then we would have absolutely no reason not to marshal their potentials to address issues, rather than to increase wealth polarization due to the concentration of technological and financial power. And so, yeah, I mean, Xiao-Li, I think that we see the capacity of our research environments to really do a lot of good in the world. And yet, as you were saying, the distribution of compute resources is not equitable. And oftentimes now, the researchers themselves are subject to the agenda setting power of larger tech companies, because they're dependent upon those tech companies for their compute and for their data. And so we don't want to sort of portray, I think, too much of a high relief here, because I think public interests are in everybody's benefit. It's in corporations' benefit too. To say that who's steering the ship should be private interest, public interests, and it's only in that way that we will address the equality issues. One more about this is, this was a question or comment in the pile. These systems are drawing on data distributions that come from human activities that reflect socio-historical patterns that are inequitable. And so if it in the right way and not addressed, they will simply replicate those inequities in the content that's generated. And so first and foremost, we need to pursue this innovation in a bias mitigation and discrimination aware manner, right? We need to address the inequities first and foremost in the data sets and in representation. And from there, then move to try to see where the public benefits lie. But we need to address inequities first and foremost.
Yeah, I just jumping in on what David's talking about. A lot of the stuff we use is stuff that, is not critical infrastructure for us. But imagine life without the internet. And increasingly, there are things that are born digital. There are ways that you have to use it. And you have to just accept, imagine sort of going to your library and using encyclopedias and never using search. So a lot of this stuff is critical infrastructure, and we have different rules for critical infrastructure. We have public interest rules for that. We ask questions like, is this cost effective? Is this fair? Does this advantage some groups and disadvantage others? And we try to fix it so that it is, you know, equal opportunity for everyone within the cost basis of everyone, you know, as fair as we can make it, because you're right, you know, human beings make these things, and often we embed inequalities even when we don't want that. But I think we have to pay special attention for the parts of AI and the parts of technology in general that we use as critical infrastructure. And I think we have to start applying different rules to it and different cost models to it, because we need these things in order to progress as a society.
Maybe I want to add one.
Thank you, Ron. Yeah,
that's not exactly on the use of those systems, but on the research on those systems. And the interesting thing is that this isn't a new phenomenon. For the past 20 years, private companies were privy to the large amounts of data that's relevant to their business, so therefore they're willing to invest. And you know, we've seen a brain drain in the field of machine learning and AI, not just since 2022, but since 2010. And the reason was that the data, which was customers' data, whether they search the internet, they shop virtually, or they connect through the internet, you know, on social channels, were present at the companies, wasn't present in public, and you couldn't make it public as private data. I think what we see here now is almost a bit easier to solve, that the amount of computation that you require for getting these emergent effects is larger than a single researcher and their research budget can afford. But in the context of a large corporation, that can be fulfilled and there's business value attached to it. So I do think if we get to more equity in terms of the research on those methods, we need to think about public infrastructure that can be used for the purpose of research and research only. That's currently not present. So I think some chairs that are well equipped at some universities have the ability to tap into, let's say, $100,000 of computation. Others cannot do that. But at least you can make that equal, as opposed to what happened in the past 20 years or 10 years, where you couldn't possibly release the data. Here, these models are trained on public data, but expensive in cost of compute. So it seems more solvable than getting equity in terms of the research on private data.
Thank you to all. And I know this conversation will go on forever, but we only have 7 minutes left. I want to make sure that there's 2 more questions we want to cover. I know that one of them is almost on everybody's mind across different age group is, well, does generative AI, you know, take away my jobs? You know, do I still have a job in the future? I know that lots of my students are pretty anxious about it. So the question is, what structure meant to disrupt? You know, so I would ask each of you maybe take a 1 minute so we can get to the final question. So maybe start with Fran. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think during disruptive technologies, we always go through these kinds of things. Will it take away your job? Well, it depends on what your job is, so I don't know. But I do think that it will be really important for us to work with AI, the same way that the pilot of the plane you just flew on works with AI to make sure that the plane is, we need to vet the answers. We need to sort of work with it as a tool. I think that it's likely that AI can enhance your job. Will it take away your job? That's pretty risky. So, so there's a good question about that kind of thing. But I do think that as we kind of smoothly move into a better relationship with AI, that we really have to look at it enhancing jobs. And some jobs it will take away. But then the question is, you know, we will need humans to be dealing with these AIs. So we will create some new jobs out of that as well.
Maybe Rolf?
Yeah, I want to continue where friends are. I completely agree. Some jobs will you just get more productive because you have a more powerful tool. Others might go away. But I think as a society, what's important is that we don't leave the people behind that have learned the previous job without that technology, so that we educate them. We don't just educate them in school, or we don't just educate them at uni, but the growth of people's jobs will be affected because the tool becomes available. They need, as society, we need to continue educating them, whether they're 30, 40, 50, or even 60. Because just having these more powerful tools, but not a training how to use them, or not a training on new jobs that emerge because the tools replace big parts of a job, is societally unfair.
David.
I mean, just to add on to those two, I would say we have to ask the question, who benefits from automation and the labor transformation, right? What we know about these systems is that these are cognitive surrogates. They're stand-ins for thinking functions, right? And as there's more automation of thinking functions, as we see with generative AI, we'll have a larger and larger, if you will, bloodless labor force, right? It'll be automated cognitive, systems out in the world. And when you move in that direction, the question is, who's actually benefiting from that automation? Because if the benefits are accruing to very few people, then we won't have better outcomes that will free those who are being displaced. And so we need to really think about the broader dynamics of, if there is labor displacement, how can society create opportunities for people to better contribute to the life of the community through their creativity, through their talent? And those are social problems that we can't just treat in an economic frame. We need to think of those as social issues.
Thank you, David. And the last question is, I would ask each panelist to give a 30 seconds answer. Give a 30 seconds answer. And that if people want to engage further, can you suggest an action item or ways in which they can make a difference? And or could you suggest the good resources for those wanting to educating themselves? Maybe start with Fran again.
Yeah, I would say we want to be in a world where humans are in charge and AI is great helpers. So we control them, they don't control us. I would say each individually, buyer beware. We have to think about the tools and services that we use. We want to make sure we're protected. We want to make sure our data is good. We want to make sure that AI is used appropriately. And really check your answers when you use ChatGPT. Don't believe everything ChatGPT tells you.
So I think your question was that where can they educate themselves further? I would say working on a special issue on HDSR, on future shock. We pay attention that it's broadly accessible. This is not your deep dive that you would get at the current Europe's conference. So that's a good source if you want to learn more and find it accessible.
David.
I would say, first and foremost, don't believe the hype. These are statistical models, mathematical systems, and we should not anthropomorphize the systems. We should really understand these as tools that are in the human hand, as Fran was saying, and are to be directed in accordance with our goals and purposes. And I mean, at the end of the day, our future should and will be a human future that's democratically rather than technocratically decided. So I would just say we need to start from our humanity rather than the technology.
Well, thank you all very much. We have 1 minute left, so it's perfect timing. I want to first thank all my 3 co-editors for your fabulous answers. I know there are many answers need to be answered, and hopefully we can continue this conversation. I want to thank GSS and Jen for giving us this opportunity to engage the alumni, and I certainly welcome everybody to read the Harvard Data Science Review, as Ralph mentioned. But I also hope that in the next conversation we're going to have an AI to join us.
Xiao-Li, thank you so much for your fantastic moderation of this really stimulating and thought-provoking discussion. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions that came in advance or even through the Q&A function today, but as you can see, this was an incredibly engaged audience, and I want to thank each and every one of you in the audience, and of course, Fran, Ralph, David, and Xiao-Li for being with us today. We will be sending a survey after this event next week, and we will be including some ways in which you might be able to interact more substantively with the Harvard Data Science Review if you're interested in learning more or in engaging deeper. So look for that in your mailboxes next week. Thank you all again, and have a wonderful rest of your day and a very happy holiday season to all.
Thank you all.